Hi, my name is Chris Airola. I'm the president of the Rental Owners Association, Sacramento Valley.
And I'm Thomas M. Hogan, Law Office of Thomas M. Hogan, and I'm on the Legal Advisory Committee for the Rental Owners Association.
So today is March 20th, and we're here to talk to our membership and prospective members who are owners of rental property about the current state of the rental industry, given we had rent control back in January, but now we're going to talk today more about the effect of the coronavirus on the industry and some of the issues that have come up just in the last 24 to 48 hours. So some of the things that we're going to talk about are the issues that I see our membership calling in and talking to us about. And by the way, if you're a member and you do have a question, you can email us right through the website, roaca.org, and we'll be happy to answer your question. Normally we're reading those emails and then we're picking up the phone and calling to have a discussion about that question. So there's the website, and here's the issues that we're going to be discussing in this video. We're going to talk about the possibility of landlords not being able to collect rent. Owners are calling us about the prospect of not being able to evict a tenant. Some of the legal issues that we're trying to navigate through. And then a big issue is how tenant screening has changed in the last 48 hours and what to do about some of the scenarios. We'll talk about how to handle property inspections, property repairs, showing vacant property, and of course, the usual concern about tenants mistreating the properties getting trashed, what we can do about it even in this environment. So it's about a 15-minute video. We divided this into sections so you can come in and restart if you can't watch the whole thing at once. Well, let's talk about the first two items here, not being able to collect rent, Tom. So tell me what's gone on with the governor and what the effect of that is in terms of landlords being able to collect rent or not.
Okay, so the state is under a statewide emergency order. The governor has asked local municipalities, local governments, to put restrictions on evictions of people who are COVID-19 affected or impacted, which means if you have a tenant who claims or shows that they are sick with the disease themselves, taking care of a relative who is, or a partner who is sick or affected, or maybe have lost a job or income as a result of it. The city of Sacramento now has an emergency order that for 120 days after the crisis is declared resolved, you still cannot give a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit to someone in those categories.
So Tom, what kind of, is there any kind of documentation that the tenant would be required to submit? For example, a tenant contacts a landlord and says, I can't pay my April rent because I was laid off.
Yes, a letter from a doctor or some proof that was in fact the case. You could request that in order to justify the course of action. And also remember that this is not a rent forgiveness, it is a rent deferment. So I'm recommending my clients, to the extent possible, make arrangements with the tenant for them to pay what they can for rent.
Exactly. In my business, I own a property management company. We are having that conversation. If you can't pay the whole rent, pay part of it, because effectively the rent is not waived. Contrary to what some interpretations have been, rent has not been waived. And the bigger hole that is dug now, the more difficult it's going to be to get out of down the road. And if you want to stay where you are and live where you are, there will come a day when courts are back open and when we can resume measures to collect rent or move tenants out. So that's fairly easy. If somebody gets laid off, you can say, well, give me a note from your employer. I know in our company we've had to scale back, and so that's easy paperwork. But for example, if somebody needs to stay home now with the children because their daycare closed, I guess a note from the daycare provider Yeah, so any kind of documentation, any cautions as to what kind of documentation, what if somebody says they're sick? Well, okay, doctor's note. So we
Right.
probably should come up with some guidelines of types of documentations that you might ask for and maybe not ask for.
Well, and we're still in cold and flu season, so people
That's true.
can get sick in general.
Right.
Or we've gotten a lot of people who, after they receive a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, are suddenly COVID impacted. So I believe our process server may be creating a cluster on his own.
Yeah.
So there is an element of well, some people will take advantage of a situation.
So let's talk about evictions. Effectively, there's a moratorium on evicting tenants who are affected by the COVID-19 virus. In other words, if they are laid off and they can provide documentation, or need to stay home and can provide documentation, or ill, there's effectively a moratorium against starting eviction proceedings, correct?
Well, you're not able to proceed with an eviction against someone who is COVID impacted.
Okay.
In a lot of areas, and there are more and more restrictions going up every day.
Okay.
One of the restrictions we're facing, of course, is that almost all of the courts right now are closed. So even if you wanted to start an eviction and had a legitimate case from pre-existing this crisis, you wouldn't be able to file it today or for the next probably 2 weeks.
So let's talk about that. I mean, we all get this. If somebody is affected by COVID virus and they have to stay home, or they got laid off their job, I think we can all empathize with that, sympathize with that, make arrangements. We're hoping that they get reinstated in their position. There's some stimulus packages being put forth by the federal government. We all get that. But here's the issue that concerns a lot of landlords is that we know of 2 cases. I have a couple myself where we were in process of eviction with the tenant for something completely way before the virus came to be, and excessive drug dealing, harassment of neighbors, considerable destruction of property, just willful destruction, malicious destruction. And even those tenants now, even though technically we can complete the paperwork, send it to the courts, call for the sheriff's writ, practically speaking, tell us what's going on with the courts, Placer County, Sacramento County, El Dorado County, Yolo, what's happening there?
Right. Well, yesterday, very suddenly, in the middle of trials, in fact, and I was in one of them, the court closed in Sacramento, and the presiding judge made an order yesterday declaring a court holiday for all but the most extreme matters until March 30th. The Placer County Court preceded the Sacramento Court with their presiding judge, Judge Panesci, made that order until effective for Placer County, which is Roseville to Tahoe, through April the 13th. And then you're going to have Yolo County, which is until April the 1st, if I'm not mistaken. And each county, including San Joaquin, around us, has closed their courts, except to domestic violence and serious criminal acts.
So, I mean, look, 95% of all tenants are good tenants, and they do what they're supposed to do, and they're not causing issues. But it is a question when you have certain issues, certain circumstances where tenants really need to be put out of a property. That's just not going to happen.
No.
For up to 60 days in some cases, certainly 45, certainly today's March 20th, so we're looking at April 1st, we're looking at 10 more days, 11 more days just to get to that point. So really, there's not a lot anyone, in terms of landlords, not what you're going to be able to do, almost regardless of what's happening.
We are in communication with the sheriff's office. The Sacramento sheriff is not doing lockouts at this time. They stopped about 3 days ago, and we are attempting to get them to do lockouts on non-rent related issues where the tenants have threatened violence or have threatened destruction, and we have a few of those cases.
Okay. All right. Well, let's continue on. Again, if you have a question about this, if you're a member and you have a question about this, go to our Ask a Question on our website. Email it over to us. We will be reading those and then getting back with you. Next subject we want to talk about, well, we've covered a lot of these, but some of the legal issues that were implemented just in January 1st in terms of rent control, particularly in rent gouging. That is, increasing rents more than 10% was considered rent gouging in much of the state. Now with this emergency order, you said? Tell me about that.
Okay, well, we are under federal and state emergency orders, so either one will impact price gouging. So if whether it's your Purell that you're going to put on eBay for $100 a bottle, or whether it's your property that you're going to be renting.
Good, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, someone did.
Doesn't work. Don't do it.
No, that is a criminal act, and so under Penal Code Section 396, for the duration of the emergency, raising rent more than 10%, and that would be 10%. If you've raised the rent in the last year less than 10%, and you raise it and the aggregate is 10% or more, that would be an illegal rent increase.
Yeah, so for example, prior to the COVID virus coming out, the COVID virus emerging, we had a client that was paying $400 a month in rent in a property that was not rent controlled. The property market value is more like $1,600 a month. So obviously we were going to raise the rent quite a lot. That's just not going to happen now, certainly through this crisis. So sometimes tenants make out well in that situation, and hopefully we'll get that, get past this and be able to get that up to market rent. But I'm sure there's many situations out there like that.
Yes, and it still is bad optics to raise rent at this point in time anyway, considering the situation.
Yeah, we don't need a television camera stuck in our face
right.
given all this.
And starting in April, there's going to be a change in the CPI, I anticipate. But at the moment, you can raise the rent 8.3% if you haven't in the past 12 months under the rent control.
8.3% coming from the state's maximum mandated 5% plus CPI,
for
and our
area.
CPI being 3.3 for this area, 5 plus 3.3, 8.3%. So yeah, that gets updated in April. So a couple weeks from now, we'll be looking for that new CPI number. Okay, next issue, tenant screening. I include this because it really does pose some very interesting scenarios. There is a point in time at which somebody applies for a property and they are accepted, and then from that point until they actually move in and get keys, maybe a week, a couple of days, sometimes even a day, a lot has changed in that week or day. So perhaps a tenant, the scenario we've run across is that a tenant applies, they're approved because they meet our written tenant screening criteria of earning 3 times the monthly rent and income, having good credit, and so on and so forth. They were approved. Application, the contracts are signed, the move-in is signed, and then the tenant was laid off, lost their job, and now they no longer earn 3 times the monthly rent and income. Now, in the past, oftentimes tenants would call us and say, "Hey, I lost my job, I can't move in." Or, "Hey, I lost my job, I still need to move in, and here's my new job, and here's from my new employer," and so on. And so we could continue with that agreement and move forward. Now, in the light of, I don't have a job, I know I'm approved, I don't have a job, I don't know when I'm going to have a job, I just need keys, and I need to move into this property. Can a landlord legitimately rescind that approval, that application approval?
And that's an excellent question.
We need an answer, Tom.
Yeah.
I know you can't answer that.
Go ahead. I'm upgrading my insurance policy as we speak.
Yeah.
Because the issue is they did qualify, and if they say, well, I've been impacted by COVID-19, and we are in a situation, you've you're either denying housing to someone who's a victim of the emergency, which could be a very good basis for going to fair housing court, or you're giving keys to someone who may never be able to pay you. It's a great dilemma,
Yeah.
and I'd say that's a case-by-case decision that you're going to have to make.
So case by case, in other words, we've seen in the past where state workers, for example, have been laid off or furloughed, and as landlords, as creditors, we still just continue on as normal because our confidence in the fact that the tenant was going to be completely made whole at some point in time, we knew that, and we would just continue on. In this scenario, we don't know that, especially maybe if it's a state worker, and we can look at history and say, I think the odds are very high that person will be made whole. Let's just continue on. Let's let them move in. Let's go forth. What if I don't do the same for a busboy at Caro's in a location that may never reopen, or even a mom and pop hamburger stand type employee? Do I still give that person keys? Can I face a discrimination issue, a fair housing issue, if I give keys to the state worker and not to the small restaurant employee? I don't know.
Well, I would definitely not trust the eviction lawyer who can't file any more evictions. That would be the last person I'd rent to. So yeah, those are all.
Don't rent it. Don't rent to you, right? Don't rent to you.
Well, but yeah, those are very.
Can we look at savings? I imagine you probably have a nice stock portfolio and savings, and a legit question. Could I say, well, show me your financial strength? I didn't ask the state worker to do that, but I might ask the other employee to do that.
I have my stock portfolio screenshot from January 31st.
It might, well, that's going to be a different picture as well, won't it? Take off about 30%. So, I think it's probably paramount that us, CAA, maybe NARPM, some of these organizations figure out some guidelines, because we need to find a way to treat all applicants the same, in my view. And if this happens to one, I need to ask for certain documentation to establish some certainty as a landlord. And my gut tells me I'm not going to be able to just pick and choose and use my own intuition on that, for sure.
No, intuition is a fast track to fair housing court when they start asking you what was your criteria when you made that decision.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. So again, you have a question, you have a certain scenario you want to run past us. If you're a member of the Rental Owners Association, shoot us an email. We'll read that, and we'll either get back to you via email, but more than likely we'll give you a call. That seems to be the most efficient way to handle these, at roaca.org, or go to rentpros.com, and we can, there's a link right there to the Rental Owners Association. Property inspections, okay. All right, well, this is fairly simple. In my view, in the past, my management company has always inspected properties on a regular basis. That is, we would make an appointment with the tenant, we'd go inside, take pictures, have a conversation with the tenant about how things were going. We'd do our tests of the smoke detectors, look for health and safety issues, so on and so forth. That meant a face-to-face connection with that tenant and my staff, and we're no longer doing those. We're suspending those inspections indefinitely until this crisis is over. Thoughts, Tom?
Well, absolutely. Even though the rental housing inspection program in Sacramento, Rancho Cordova, Sacramento County requires that you do annual inspections as a matter of law, in this environment, exposing your employees or your maintenance people or your contractors to the virus may have direct legal liability back to whoever sent them.
Yeah.
So you're talking about workers' compensation or other damages. So there's no point in exposing someone for something that's not an emergency.
I've read so much from all the from California Apartment Association and NARPM and all the other agencies in the government, and I don't know where it was that I read this, but they considered home inspections at this point to be reckless behavior and to not engage in it. Because if anything bad comes from that, there could be some serious repercussions. Could you do a virtual inspection? We've talked about that, where the tenant and you get the landlord and tenant get together on a Skype type. Very simple on Messenger. You can call anybody on Messenger and do a video communication. It's really easy. But then again, how effective will that be?
Right.
As a management company, I'm pretty convinced that I'm going to see whatever somebody wants me to see, and I'm not going to see the things they don't want me to see. Is that better than nothing? I don't know. We're weighing that out right now, and that's up to you as a landlord whether you want to try to. But certainly, I don't think it's going to substitute for an RHIP inspection, a county inspection, a county required inspection.
And you're not going to get your, perhaps elderly or disabled tenant to climb on a ladder and push the smoke detector test button.
Well,
or
more fundamentally, you're probably not going to get an elderly to be able to figure out how to use. Like I have tenants out there, residents who absolutely don't even have a cell phone, don't have a computer, and don't want one, and so that's not going to happen there. So all of these things we're weighing out. Property repairs now. That's something that's changed dramatically just in the last 24 hours, really the last 10 hours. Until this point, we were making repairs that were, of course, necessary repairs, and even repairs that were non-essential. We had ceiling fans out, we had mini blinds that were not functioning, and we would go ahead if the tenant was in agreement, the vendor was in agreement, that is the repairman, everybody was, let's do this, we would send them. As of this morning, that's no longer the case. We are not sending any repairmen unless we have an emergency situation, such as
if there's a plumbing leak, if there's water running out, if there's a fire hazard, a safety issue, then you definitely have to take care of those matters. But otherwise, the same as with inspections. Unless it's an emergency, you're not going to put someone in danger to fix a mini blind. So that's
right. So I mean, if something's we had a mold issue. It was a roof leak and a mold issue. That we would send somebody on. I want to stop the leak. I want to cover the mold. I'm probably not going to tear the place apart. In fact, we look to our vendors to tell us, is this something that if we cover with plastic, it can hold off for a month or however long this crisis lasts. And in that case, the restoration company said, absolutely, it's contained. You should have no more issues provided you repair the roof. So those kind of things we send out on. But again, as you stated earlier, no mini blind repairs, no broken fan repairs right now. Showing vacant properties has dramatically changed this week. Of course, in the past, you and I, landlords, anyone who owns rental property, typically has an interested party. We will meet that party at the property, show them around, answer questions about the property, and then go forth with application and so on. That has changed in light of the shelter in place, having as little contact with each other as possible. We are no longer doing that, and I suggest you do the same. And here's what we're doing. We have videotape. Of course, we've always had photos of our properties, but now we've gone out to each property that's vacant and ready, and we take extensive video of that property and place that right in the ad, right in the Zillow ad, the Trulia ad, wherever it is, a Facebook ad, wherever it is that you're advertising that property. There's usually a link right there. You can just download your photos and download your video. And that is going to have to be enough for tenants to make a decision to go ahead and apply. Once they've applied, then we're having a DocuSign lease agreement and move-in inspection electronically. Any problem with that?
I think that's the most practical solution.
Standard, acceptable method.
Yeah.
And then once we have the tenant bring the cashier's check to our office, and we are actually issuing keys through the Dropbox without any direct contact at all between my staff or myself and our prospective, now our moving in tenant. So any other methods on how you might want to exchange keys and money and without contact?
Well, I was thinking of the Cold War epic, which you just meet on opposite sides of the bridge, and you flash your light in code, and then you leave a briefcase in the middle, and someone goes and picks it
Hostage
up.
goes. I knew you would come up with that one, Tom. Yeah. Anyway, well, these are some of the issues that have come up with our from our membership, from our landlords and my management company. Things that I've seen myself. Just a few of the issues. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more as things change in the next week. You've got the courts closed, so your docket is coming open. You're going to have a lot of time for reading and catching up on the TV. And I know you folks out there at home, you're home, you have time to watch some of these kind of videos and maybe keep abreast of what's happening on a local level, a practical level. Give us a holler at the Rental Owners Association, and we'll be happy to help. All right, well, thanks again, Tom, for coming in. Thanks, y'all, for listening out there, and we will be back with more very soon.